I never thought my marriage would unravel over something as ordinary as dinner. No heated arguments, no dramatic outbursts, just a quiet, almost uneventful moment that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, and I remember that detail because I had just come home from work, exhausted but determined to hold on to some sense of normalcy. As always, I prepared dinner chicken parmesan, her favorite. The kitchen filled with the familiar, comforting aroma of simmering sauce, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe we might actually have a peaceful evening. Then she walked in. Margot carried that same distant look I had grown accustomed to seeing, a detached expression, as if she had already left our life behind in her mind. There was no greeting, no kiss on the cheek like before. She simply tossed her purse onto the counter and let out a dramatic sigh. I didn't ask what was wrong. I already knew. I had known for a long time. We sat down at the table, the air thick with silence, weighted by words left unsaid. She barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate rather than eating. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. And then, without even looking at me, she said it. I want a divorce. No hesitation. No emotion. As if she were casually requesting the salt. I should have been shocked, maybe even angry. But the truth was, I had been expecting this. It was like watching a car crash unfold in slow motion, inevitable and impossible to stop. So, I did the one thing she hadn't anticipated. I smiled. Margot's fork clattered against her plate as she blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Okay, I said, slicing another bite of chicken and placing it in my mouth. Her brows furrowed. Did you hear what I just said? I nodded. Yeah, I heard you. You want a divorce. That's fine. Let's do it. Her lips parted as if she had more to say, but nothing came out. She had been prepared for an argument, for resistance, maybe even for me to plead with her to reconsider. What she wasn't expecting was my complete indifference. Leaning back, I casually wiped my mouth with a napkin before meeting her eyes. So, when are you moving out? The color drained from Margot's face. That question wasn't part of her plan. She had anticipated control over this situation, believing I would crumble, beg, or fight to keep her. Instead, I handed her exactly what she wanted, without the slightest resistance. I could see the realization settling in. This was going to be more complicated than she had anticipated. She had assumed she held the upper hand, but in reality, she had no idea what she had just set in motion. She sat there, blinking, struggling to process my reaction. She had probably practiced this conversation, rehearsing different outcomes in her mind. Maybe she pictured me getting upset, demanding answers, or pleading for a second chance. Instead, I simply took another sip of my wine and watched her wrestle with the unexpected shift in control. Finally, she cleared her throat. That's it. You're not even going to ask why. I shrugged, cutting another piece of my chicken. Nope. Her jaw tightened. Grant, I'm serious. I chuckled, finally setting my fork down. Oh, I know you are. You've been serious for months now, haven't you? Staying out late, dressing differently, glued to your phone at all hours. This isn't coming out of nowhere, Margot. I've just been waiting for you to finally say it. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, guilt. Maybe? I couldn't be sure. But she quickly smothered it with a sigh, shaking her head. I don't want to argue. Neither do I. Silence fell between us again. I studied her carefully, watching as she tried to regain control. She had imagined herself leading this breakup, dictating how things would unfold. But now, she was starting to realize she had miscalculated. After a long pause, she finally muttered, I'll start looking for a place. I leaned back. Good idea. Let me know when you find one. Her fingers tensed around her fork, knuckles turning white. I could see the frustration simmering beneath the surface, but she swallowed it down. She wanted to be the one steering this moment, yet suddenly, she was playing by my rules. And the most satisfying part? I wasn't even trying to make it difficult for her. I was simply done. That night, she barely spoke another word. After clearing her plate, she retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. I remained at the table for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me. Did it hurt? Maybe a little. A decade is a long time to share a life with someone. But what I felt most wasn't sadness, it was relief. For the past year, I had felt like a stranger in my own marriage, walking on eggshells, pretending not to notice the growing distance. Now, the pretense was over. Margot had made her choice. And for the first time in months, I realized I finally had a choice too. I was determined to come out of this situation stronger than she had ever imagined. But as for Margot, she was about to learn that she had made the worst mistake of her life. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was heartbroken, but because my mind was racing. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while beside me, Margot shifted restlessly. Maybe she thought I'd retreat to the couch or drown my sorrows in a bottle somewhere. But I stayed right where I was. The tension between us was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Even in the darkness, I could sense her discomfort. She had expected a different reaction from me, and the fact that she wasn't getting it was unsettling her. At some point, she must have drifted off, because when morning came and I got out of bed, she was still curled beneath the blankets. I moved through my routine as if nothing had changed, showered, shaved, made my coffee. By the time I was buttering my toast, she finally emerged. Margot appeared in the doorway, clad in one of my old college t-shirts, her hair in disarray. Something about her seemed off. Maybe she was just tired, or maybe she was already starting to regret her decision. But she quickly pulled herself together, straightened her posture, and leaned against the counter, arms crossed over her chest. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. I was thinking, maybe we don't need to rush this. I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding. Rush what? The divorce, she clarified, testing my reaction. I knew exactly what she was doing. The night before, she had made her bold declaration, expecting chaos, expecting me to fight her on it. But I had simply agreed, and now she wasn't so sure anymore. I placed my mug down and met her gaze. You seemed pretty confident last night. She hesitated. I am. But I don't want us to make any rash decisions. There it was. Uncertainty. I nearly smirked but kept my face unreadable. She had probably spent weeks, maybe months, preparing for this moment, expecting me to break down, to react in a way that would justify her choice. But now that she saw me standing firm, she was faltering. Leaning against the counter, I mirrored her stance. Margot, you told me you don't love me anymore. If that's truly how you feel, what's left to discuss? She exhaled sharply, frustration flickering in her expression. It's not that simple, Grant. I tilted my head slightly. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Her jaw tightened. You're really just okay with this? Moving on so easily? Absolutely. I gave her a small, deliberate smile before picking up my toast. Honestly, Margot, this is the best news I've heard in months. The look on her face? Priceless. She had entered this situation believing she had the upper hand, convinced that she was in complete control. But suddenly, the dynamic had shifted, and she wasn't as certain anymore. She swallowed, then forced a strained smile. Well, I'm glad you're taking it well. I nodded, chewing thoughtfully. I really am. So, have you started looking for a new place yet? That hit the mark. Her fingers twitched slightly against the counter, and I saw the brief flash of panic in her eyes. No, she admitted. I thought maybe I could stay here for a little while, until I figure things out. Now, that was interesting. The same woman who had been eager to walk away suddenly needed more time. I set my plate down and sighed. Margot, I don't think that's a good idea. You wanted freedom, right? You should embrace it. Find a place of your own. Start your new life. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. Her grip on the counter tightened. She hadn't seen this coming. She thought she could dictate the pace of this separation, keep me within reach while she figured out whatever she truly wanted. But I wasn't going to allow that. You're really pushing me out? She finally asked, her tone sharp. I'm letting you go, I corrected her, my voice even. This is what you asked for, remember? She had no response. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my coffee and the satisfying realization that I had just won the first round. What she didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Margot's behavior started to shift. At first, she kept up her act, pretending she was still in control, as if everything was going according to her plan. She carried herself as though she was the patient one, the reasonable one, waiting for me to catch up. But the cracks were beginning to show. I saw it in the way she lingered around the house, hesitating instead of making plans. I noticed how she kept watching me, waiting for some kind of emotional response, anger, sadness, regret. But I gave her nothing. For years, I had been the one chasing after her, always the one trying to make things work. But now, for the first time, I wasn't. And she had no idea how to handle that. Then, things took an unexpected turn. She stopped mentioning the divorce entirely. At first, I assumed she was just avoiding the topic because it made her uncomfortable. But as time passed, it became clear she wasn't avoiding it. She was delaying it. She still hadn't started looking for an apartment. Every time I brought it up, she had a new excuse. It's hard to find a good place. I don't want to rush into something bad. I need to make sure I can afford it. But I wasn't buying it. That last statement grabbed my attention. Margot wasn't exactly reckless with money, but she had never been responsible with it either. She enjoyed her comforts, always expecting things to fall into place. If I had to make a guess, she probably assumed that our divorce would leave her financially secure. Unfortunately for her, I had already taken steps to ensure otherwise. I had met with a lawyer in advance. Of course, I didn't let her know that. Instead, I played along, nodding at her excuses, pretending to be none the wiser. But behind the scenes, I was laying the groundwork for what was coming. I was aware she hadn't been faithful. She never admitted it outright, but she didn't have to. The late nights, the sudden emotional distance, the way she treated me like I was merely filling a space until something better came along, it was all too obvious. So, I started looking into it. And it didn't take long to uncover the truth. Checking our shared bank records, I found unexplained expenses, hotel reservations, expensive dinners, and gifts that were certainly not for me. But instead of confronting her, I remained silent. I simply began preparing. The more I did, the more anxious she became, though she hadn't realized why just yet. Something felt off to her, but she couldn't put her finger on what. About a week after she first brought up the divorce, she joined me on the couch late one night. I was watching TV, pretending not to notice her restless glances in my direction. After a moment, she finally spoke. "Grant, are you sure this is what you want?" I almost laughed. She was testing me, trying to gauge whether she still had the option to backtrack, to take control of the situation again. Instead of reacting, I simply smiled. "Of course. This was your idea, wasn't it?" She bit her lip, clearly frustrated. "Yeah, but I don't know. I thought it would feel different." I turned to her. "Do you regret it?" Her eyes darted away. "I don't know. Liar." She was already realizing she had miscalculated. But I had no intention of making this easy for her. "Well," I said, leaning back, "it's too late now. I've already met with my lawyer." I saw the tension in her entire body. I didn't even glance at her, keeping my attention on the screen as if what I had just said was nothing significant, as if it wasn't the first major blow to her carefully laid plans. What?" she asked, her voice tight. "I met with a lawyer," I repeated. "Got everything in motion. We'll go through the finances, divide things up, and then you can start your new life. Just like you wanted." Silence. The air between us grew thick with tension. This wasn't how she had imagined things playing out. In her mind, she was supposed to be the one controlling the timeline, stretching things out at her own pace, maybe even keeping me around as an option. But I had just made it clear that I wasn't waiting for her. She swallowed hard. "Grant, I don't want to rush this." I finally turned to her. "Why not?" She hesitated. Maybe we should think things through, you know? There's a lot to figure out." I smiled, a knowing look in my eyes. "That's why I have a lawyer. Don't worry, we'll get everything sorted." She blinked rapidly, struggling to form a response. I could see the realization settling in. She had made a mistake, a big one. And the best part? She was only now beginning to grasp just how badly she had miscalculated. After that night, her behavior changed. She became more cautious, more on edge. At first, the shift was subtle, but I picked up on it right away. She suddenly took an interest in my schedule, asking when I'd be home or if I'd be late. She lingered near the door whenever I was on the phone, pretending to scroll through her own device but clearly listening in. She was uneasy, and she had every reason to be. I had already seen the signs, the hotel bookings, the fancy dinners, the extra cash withdrawals. I had even found an Uber receipt leading to an unfamiliar address, coincidentally on a night she had claimed to be working late. But I had no intention of confronting her outright. That would have been too simple. Instead, I took a different approach, one that I knew would shake her even more. I ignored it. I carried on as usual, showing no signs of anger or sadness. I was deliberate, calculated, and that unsettled her more than anything. One evening, I came home later than usual. I had been meeting with my lawyer, finalizing the details. As I stepped inside, I noticed Margot sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine she wasn't actually reading. She barely gave me time to put my keys down before she spoke. "Where were you?" The irony almost made me laugh. For months, she had been the one disappearing, brushing off my concerns, acting like I was being unreasonable for questioning her. And now? Now she was the one uneasy. I shrugged. "Out." Her expression tightened. "Out where?" I kicked off my shoes and stretched. "Just had some things to take care of." She gave me a sharp look, her eyes searching for something, some kind of clue, a weakness, anything she could use. You've been acting strange lately. I raised an eyebrow. Me? Acting strange? She hesitated. Yeah, like. I don't know. It's like you don't even care about any of this. I watched her carefully, letting a pause stretch between us. She was waiting, expecting some sort of reaction, an opening she could exploit. Instead, I just exhaled. Margot, I'm not upset. If anything, I feel bad for you. Her expression twitched. What is that supposed to mean? I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. It means you wanted this. You were so certain that carrying a gun would make things easier, that leaving would be simple, and that I'd fall apart without you. But look at you now, sitting there, questioning everything. I'm not questioning anything, she snapped, her voice sharp. I simply smiled, knowing it would get under her skin. She hated that. Frustrated, she stood abruptly, causing the magazine on her lap to slip onto the floor. I just think maybe we should take a step back, she said, folding her arms. Divorce is a big decision. I tilted my head slightly. That's interesting. You weren't saying that last week. She exhaled and looked away. I just don't want to make a mistake. And there it was of the crack. The first flicker of genuine doubt in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't as sure as she once was. She had assumed I would chase her, plead with her, crumble in her absence. But now, as she watched me move forward without a second thought, she was forced to face an unexpected truth. She was the one losing here. And she was desperately searching for a way to regain control. But I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative. Letting out an exaggerated sigh, I rubbed my temples. You know what, Margot? You have a point. Divorce is a significant decision. We shouldn't rush. For a brief moment, a flicker of hope crossed her face, lighting up her expression. Then, with deliberate calmness, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and placed it in front of her on the table. She stared at it, hesitant. What is this? My smile remained steady. Our divorce agreement. Take your time reviewing it. Her breath caught in her throat. You already had this prepared? I offered a casual shrug. Of course. I figured it was best to take care of everything quickly. Her lips parted slightly, her gaze flickering over the envelope like it was something dangerous. And in that moment, I saw it, raw, undeniable fear. She had just realized the truth. I wasn't waiting for her. And for the first time since this all began, it was Margot who was panicking. Things started changing after that night. Margot's behavior shifted, subtly at first, but I noticed. She became more anxious, more cautious. She suddenly seemed interested in my schedule, casually asking if I'd be home late. She lingered near the doorway when I took phone calls, pretending to scroll through her phone but clearly listening. She was worried, and she had every reason to be. I had already discovered odd financial patterns, unexplained cash withdrawals, high-end restaurant bills that didn't align with her usual habits, and Uber receipts to addresses I didn't recognize, all coinciding with the night she had claimed to be working late. But I had no intention of confronting her. That would be too simple. Instead, I did something far more effective. I ignored it. I carried on with my life as if nothing had changed. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was calculating. And that scared her more than anything. One evening, I came home later than usual, having just finished a meeting with my lawyer to finalize the paperwork. As I stepped inside, Margot was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine she clearly wasn't reading. The moment I set my keys down, she spoke up. Where were you? The irony was almost laughable. For months, she had been the one coming home late, brushing off my questions, making me feel unreasonable for doubting her. But now, she was the one growing uneasy. I shrugged. Out. Her expression tightened. Out where? Kicking off my shoes, I stretched lazily. Just had some things to take care of. She studied me carefully, her gaze sharp, searching for something, some sign, some explanation. You've been acting strange lately. I raised an eyebrow. Me? Acting strange. She hesitated before continuing. Yeah, like, I don't know. It's like you don't even care about any of this. I took my time responding, letting her sit with the silence. She was waiting for something, a reaction, an opening, anything she could use. Instead, I simply exhaled. Margot, I'm not angry. If anything, I feel bad for you. Her jaw clenched. What is that supposed to mean? Leaning against the counter, I crossed my arms. It means this is what you wanted. You were so certain leaving would be easy, that I'd fall apart without you. But now, you're the one second-guessing everything. Her posture stiffened. I'm not second-guessing anything, she snapped. I smiled. Of course. That reaction irritated her, just as I expected. She stood up abruptly, her magazine forgotten as it slipped to the floor. I just think we should slow down. Divorce is a big decision. Tilting my head, I gave her a pointed look. You weren't saying that last week. She folded her arms. I just don't want to make a mistake. That was the moment I saw it, the crack in her confidence. The first sign of genuine regret. She had expected me to chase her, to fight for her, to break down in her absence. But now, watching me move forward without hesitation, she realized something. She was the one losing here. And she was scrambling to stop it. But I wasn't going to let her change the story. With a dramatic sigh, I ran a hand through my hair. You know what, Margot? You're absolutely right. Divorce is a major decision. Let's not rush it. A flash of hope crossed her features, but it was short-lived. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the manila envelope, dropping it onto the table in front of her. She stared at it, hesitation flickering in her eyes. What is this? Keeping my expression calm, I smiled. Our divorce agreement. Go ahead and review it when you have time. Her breath hitched. You already had this drawn up? I shrugged. Of course. Her lips parted slightly as she looked at the envelope like it was a threat. And then, for the first time, I saw it. Undeniable fear. She had just realized what I had known all along. I wasn't waiting for her. And now, it was Margot who was panicking. I knew the best approach was to address it head-on without delay. As I slid the envelope toward her, I noticed the way her lips parted slightly, her gaze fixating on it like it was something dangerous. And then it appeared, that unmistakable look of fear. Raw and absolute. In that moment, I realized I had tipped my hand. I wasn't waiting anymore. And for the first time since this all began, Margot was the one unraveling. She didn't have a response. She just sat there, the book she had been holding entirely forgotten, her expression frozen in a mix of panic and shock. I could almost sense the frantic thoughts racing through her mind. What does he know? How much? Can I still control this narrative? I let the silence stretch between us, giving her time to stew in it. Finally, she forced herself to take a breath. Grant, what are you talking about? She asked, her voice carefully measured. Leaning back, I rested my arm against the couch, keeping my tone casual. I'm talking about Patrick Howard, the man whose apartment you have a key to, the one you were with today instead of Gloria. She blinked, and there it was, her first misstep. I don't know a Patrick Howard, she claimed. Without a word, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and with just 2 taps, the evidence was in front of her. I turned the screen so she could see it clearly, a high-resolution image of her walking into his apartment building. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. She was cornered. She knew it. But still she tried. Grant, it's not what you think. A quiet chuckle escaped me as I shook my head. Lil, you don't even know what I think yet. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then tried again. He's just a friend. I tilted my head slightly. That's interesting. Most people don't have keys to their friends' apartments. She faltered, searching for a way out, then made her second mistake. Her posture shifted, shoulders squaring as a forced laugh left her lips. The flicker of guilt that had been there moments ago? Gone. All right, fine, she admitted. Yes, I was at his place. But that doesn't mean anything. I smirked. Here we go? Oh. I crossed my arms. Because from where I'm sitting, it sure looks like you've been lying to me for months. She let out a dramatic sigh, as if she were the one being wronged. I wasn't lying, Grant. I was just handling things on my own. That nearly made me laugh. Handling things? That's an interesting way to put it, I said, keeping my tone even. So tell me, what exactly were you handling at Patrick's place? She hesitated again, lips parting before pressing into a firm line. And then she made her third, and worst, mistake. She doubled down. Grant, I don't have to explain every little thing I do to you, she snapped. We're getting a divorce. My personal life isn't your business anymore. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting her words settle. Then I smiled. Good, I said, standing up. I'm glad we're on the same page. Her brows knitted together. What? Without responding, I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the divorce papers, and held them up. Since we're doing our own thing now, you won't mind signing these. Her entire body went rigid. Panic flashed across her face as she stared at the papers like they were something deadly. Grant, let's not do this right now. I didn't move. Why not? She swallowed hard. Because this isn't how I wanted things to go. I let out a short chuckle, shaking my head. Oh, You mean you didn't expect me to find out? Her expression flickered. Anger, frustration, but she kept her voice level. I just think we should take some time to talk about everything. I studied her. Talk about what, exactly? She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Grant, come on. I don't want this to get ugly. A dry laugh escaped me. Lil, we're way past that. She swallowed again, fingers digging into her palms. I could see it now. She was losing her grip on the situation. I leaned forward, placing the papers in front of her. Sign them. She shook her head. I need more time. For what? I asked, my voice steady. To decide if Patrick is worth it, or to see if I'll just let this slide. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. Taking a slow breath, I leaned back. You already made your choice, Lil. You just assumed you had time to figure out the details. That I'd sit here waiting, letting you set the timeline for when and how this happened. She lowered her gaze, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? I cut in. Lie? Betray me? Or just get caught? She flinched, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. Just exhaustion. I rubbed the back of my neck, letting out a sigh. I'll make this easy for you, I said. You don't have to sign anything tonight. But you have until Friday. She blinked. Friday? I nodded. Yeah, because that's when you're moving out. Her breath hitched. Stretching like I had just finished a casual conversation. I stood up. You have a few days to get your things in order. I'll be staying at a hotel this weekend, so you won't have to see me when you leave. She shook her head, her voice rising slightly. Grant, that's ridiculous. I can't just. Yes, you can, I said simply. You wanted to be on your own, Lil. Now's your chance. She stared at me, wide-eyed, her throat working as she tried to grasp the reality of what was happening. And then, for the first time in weeks, I saw it. Real fear. Not just worry. Not just frustration. Fear. She had just come to the crushing realization that she had overstepped, and now, she had no more moves left to play. Margot sat frozen, her face a mask of shock, her mind desperately searching for an escape. But there was none. She knew it. I knew it. I let the silence stretch between us, watching as the truth sank in and unraveled her right before my eyes. For years, I had been the one second-guessing myself, questioning whether I was imagining things that weren't there. But this time, she was the one struggling to find her footing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she exhaled a shaky breath. Grant, I lifted a hand to stop her. Don't. Just save it. Her lips pressed shut instantly. Without another word, I stood up, picked up the manila envelope from the table, and let it drop in front of her. You wanted a divorce? Fine, but we do it on my terms. Her eyes flickered from the stack of documents to me, uncertainty flashing across her face. What does that mean? A slow smirk spread across my lips. It means you walk away with nothing. Her entire body went rigid. What? Settling back into my chair, I leaned in, completely at ease. See, I did my research, Lil. I know about Patrick. The hotels. The gifts. The money transfers. I have proof of everything. And because you decided to cheat, our prenup takes effect. Her jaw nearly hit the floor. Prenup? I gave her a slow nod. That's right. The one you signed 10 years ago. The one that clearly states if you're unfaithful, you leave with nothing. The color drained from her face. In all the years I had known her, I had never seen her at a loss for words. But now, she was completely powerless. Her lips quivered as she whispered, Grant, please. We can fix this. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Fix it? How exactly? You wanted to be free, right? Well, now you are. Just without my money. She swallowed hard, on the verge of tears, but I felt nothing. Not pity. Not regret. Not anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. She held my gaze for what felt like forever before finally murmuring, I made a mistake. A low chuckle escaped me. Yeah, you did. She opened her mouth again, maybe to beg, maybe to argue, but I was done. I rose to my feet, cutting her off before she could get another word in. You have 30 days to move out. After that, you're on your own. She didn't protest. She didn't argue. She didn't even try to fight back. She just sat there, utterly defeated. And me? I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight was gone. No more doubts, no more pain, no more heartbreak. Margot thought she would walk away with everything. But in the end, she was the one left with nothing. And me? I finally got my freedom. A fresh start. And honestly, It felt incredible.